so this kind of discussion format that we're going to be having now, for those of you who are at University of Sussex, we do this kind of thing every Wednesday. So either myself or another member of the committee will sort of moderate smaller rooms of 5 to 6 kind of people on various topics. And it's a kind of informal, bring your own drink kind of discussion where you can kind of, you know, present your own arguments, present your own opinions, and have them challenged by other people. You can challenge other people's opinions. And yeah, I say moderated, and it's all very informal, and making sure everything stays on the right track and people aren't yelling at each other. But yeah, if that's your bag, if that's the kind of thing you enjoy, then feel free to come along every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Just check out our Facebook page, and all the details will be on there. So yeah, does anyone here not want to be part of the discussion? Because I think we're going to move on to that now. So do feel free to head off if you're not interested in it. And everyone who stays, I'll assume that you're up for that. And I think if there's anybody who would particularly like to speak to somebody else, I know that there's a few arguments that have been going on in the chat while the thing is going on. Please put that now. And assuming everyone agrees, we can put you all in the same room. But yeah, or if people are here, if people want to actively take part in the discussion, trying to think, what I might do is just unmute everybody now, because I think a lot of people are just here to sort of listen in a bit more. And if that gets too chaotic, then we can split people up a bit more. But yeah, as of right now, I'm gonna take the risk. Please, everybody, be nice, and I'm just going to basically unmute everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hello. I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was the most interesting discussion I've seen on feminism in years.
Oh, fantastic. Good news. And you're the expert as well.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but no, I thought that was just fascinating. I'm just disappointed that a certain woman is not here, because about an hour ago, one of the things that struck me was that, sorry, one of the things that struck me, oh, sorry, yes, her video feed is still on. There's just a gentleman there. So I asked her about an hour ago something that she didn't reply to, which was that I could name 20, frankly, I could name 25 areas where the human rights of men and boys in the UK today are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions. And I invited her to tell me one where the human rights of women and girls are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions. And she couldn't come up with one, and now she's on her phone, I see.
Yeah, so is that Eloise that you're referring to there? Hi, Eloise. Are you staying with us or
Me?
off? Yes.
My name's Zoe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know Mike would very much like to have a conversation with you if you'd like to do the same.
What was the question?
So it's really simple. I could tell you 25 areas where the human rights of men and boys in Britain today are assaulted by the state's actions or inactions. Can you tell me one area, just one, where the human rights of women and girls specifically are assaulted by the state today?
List the 25. List them now.
Oh, piss off.
No, come on now.
Don't use rude language at me.
Let's
The 25.
I don't want to do that. Sorry, guys.
What the fuck you want about?
Okay, I'm muting everybody there, and I'm not allowing you to unmute yourselves. And I'm being very serious about this. We are having a respectful discussion here. Okay? This is our platform that we are providing to you guys. Everyone here is going to be very respectful on both sides. We are a free speech platform, but we will not allow anything that causes unproductive conversation. I'm not interested. Behave yourselves. Okay, now you can unmute yourselves.
I think, you know, I mean, we could throw the question out to everybody. Can anybody
Sorry, Ellie, I'm sorry. Sorry,
name one area where the human rights of women and girls are assaulted? Anyone?
sorry, since I was asked, sorry, Ellie, since I was asked, male genital mutilation is illegal, as is female genital mutilation, but the state has poured hundreds of millions of pounds into stopping female genital mutilation and derives income taxes from the butchers, the criminal butchers who carry out male genital mutilation. That's one thing. And another thing is domestic abuse. Men are at least half the victims of domestic abuse, and there's just a mountain of evidence to support that. And yet men do not get 1% of the support as victims that women get. So I'd really like to hear Eloise or anyone in that room, you know, tell me one area where the human rights of women and girls in Britain are assaulted today. One.
Well, I feel like you've already named two, like domestic violence and female genital mutilation. Like, I agree with you that like the funding for men is appalling and it absolutely should be better. Like, there is a huge disparity there and it is not acceptable that we ignore these problems. But you yourself have named two serious problems for women in the UK. Right.
So you don't see that it's because of feminists that there is virtually zero money going, there is no interest in ending male genital mutilation. There's no interest in supporting male victims of domestic violence. You know, that's all, you know. I agree with you. Like, there should, like, it is absolutely unacceptable that there is not enough support for. But why is that? Why the hell is that? Well, there's quite a lot of answers to that question, I think. And I think, yeah, I would agree that the sort of like pop feminism and like the way like these really radical forms of feminism have overtaken like a lot of the cultural mindset is a massive like indicator, like step to make that not be a thing. Sorry, my words are getting really mixed up. But I'd say there are other factors as well. Like there are overarching power structures, I would say, which sort of make it very difficult sometimes. Like, I don't know, like men, I feel, I don't know personally, but as I understand it, whenever men are in situations of domestic violence, there is much greater stigma and shame coming forward and talking about that kind of thing. Like there is. Which are not to do with modern forms of feminism. They have been there and been present for a very long time. So I'd say, whilst I would agree that there are certain forms of radical feminism which are abhorrent and are like just really unpleasant, and they're very like excluding and just very bad, don't like them. But I wouldn't say that that's like the cause of like all feminisms and all of no, but it's those forms of feminism which account for less than 1% of the money for domestic abuse victims going to men. Organizations like Women's Aid and Refuge, who perpetrate this fucking lie year after year, decade after decade, that most victims of domestic abuse are men, are women, and that most perpetrators are that most victims are women, and that most perpetrators are men. It's a fucking lie, and it's been known for decades it's a lie. And those are the feminists who call the shots.
Can I? Oh, no. You hear me?
So we'll do Edward, and then we'll go back to Liz afterwards.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
So the thing I'd like to bring up to anybody. So within the men's rights movement, there is a lady called Erin Pitsey, I'm not sure whether the feminists on here have actually ever heard of her, but she was a lady who actually founded the original women's refuge movement in 1971. And she opened a house in Chiswick in West London. And the thing about Erin Pitsey was that she actually founded the refuge movement before it had any influence from the feminist movement. And I would urge any of the feminists on this chat to go and actually look at Erin Pizzey's story, because Erin Pizzey actually had always knew right from the very beginning that domestic violence between men and women was never actually a gender issue. It was never always men on women or women on men. It was basically a kind of a two-way thing, because both of her parents were violent to each other. And she actually realized that early on. And when women started coming into the women's refuge in Chiswick, she actually interviewed them quite honestly. And basically she found that of the first 100 women that came into the refuge, 62 of them were just as violent than the men they actually left. And there are some reasons for this. And basically it's down to the fact that it's kind of intergenerational. It's got nothing to do with patriarchy or whatever the feminist explanation is. It's much more involved than that. And basically what happened to Erin Pizzey is that the radical feminist movement of the 70s, it was a Marxist movement. And what it did is that it came in and hijacked her refuge movement. And that is basically the radical feminists who did that have been running the show in the domestic violence industry ever since. And people should be aware of that. And they have basically shaped the narrative on this for all these decades. And it's very, very difficult for men. It's bad enough actually for men to come forward already without all of this this narrative that it's only men who abuse women. Did you get that?
Yep, all good. All right. Hang on. We said we go to Liz afterwards. So Liz, you do your part, and then we'll go to Mike afterwards.
Thank you. So I may have misunderstood this a little bit, but you said so a large portion of domestic violence had nothing to do with gender, is what she found, right?
So basically her theory around domestic violence, that it wasn't really to do with gender, because she knew from a very early age that both her parents could be violent. And in fact, her mother was actually more violent to her because she looked like her father. And obviously her parents had an extremely dysfunctional relationship. And so her theory about it was that it was intergenerational, that people basically become violent because they sort of acquire a certain, it's like a pattern of violence that basically is passed from one generation to the next. And that flies in the face of the feminist explanation, which is that it's simply men's desire to exercise patriarchal control over women.
I would agree that feminist explanation is quite reductive and doesn't really capture the full scope of what happens within a lot of domestic violence situations. But I feel like if you brought some aspects of intersectional theory into it and brought things in like class and race and things like that, you could also use that as well as this generational theory thing. So I feel like a little bit of what you're doing here is applying some form of mild intersectional theory to explain a very complex and genuinely horrendous problem. I agree, domestic violence is not entirely gender-based, but
well, what I would say to that is that, look, all Erin Pizzey tried to do in the early 70s was to try to bring to light the fact that as well as men being violent towards women, which obviously does happen, I don't deny that at all, of course I don't, but there are some women who are violent towards men as well. And the problem is that Erin Pizzey was basically had to go into exile for something like 15 years out of this country because she was hounded and picketed by radical feminists. And that surely can't be acceptable. I mean, eventually they did get this work published, and it was in a book that was called Prone to Violence. And basically it just offers this other theory. I mean, I don't think intersectional theory has got anything to offer on this, quite frankly. I think, to me, intersectional feminist theory looks to me just like the oppression Olympics. I just don't think it has anything to offer on these issues at all, I'm afraid.
Can I
Go
and respond to Elizabeth's comment that domestic violence is not entirely gender-based. That's beautiful. It's kind of like almost every article.
Sorry, I feel like that's something Edward said. Sorry, I was just sorry.
Oh,
I just
sorry,
don't want.
I thought you had said it's not entirely gender based, Elizabeth.
I might have done. Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Liz had said it just in
Right.
response to Edward's point.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to come to that. It's like almost every bloody article on domestic abuse I've read in 10 years said, of course not all perpetrators are men, of course not all victims are women. And the implication is that it's overwhelmingly men who are perpetrators and women victims. And there are, to the best of my knowledge, and I've been studying this for 10 years, two major bodies of knowledge about domestic abuse. The first is, and I would recommend anybody who's interested in this and any other gender issues to buy William Collins's book, The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect. The first body of knowledge is PASK, the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project. The second is Professor Martin Fiebert from the University, I think, of Southern California, who has been posting stuff for like 30 years. He's been analyzing this, and both have done just vast meta studies, both of which concluded basically that women, that in straight couples, women are at least as violent as men towards their partners, and many studies have shown that lesbians are the most violent group when it comes to violence. So Elizabeth, I was just trying to say, I kind of get that it was a comment, but it's, I've heard a million times that comment, and it's the bottom line is women are as violent as men towards their partners. At least as violent, sometimes, as in lesbian couples, more violent.
Sexual
Sorry,
assault.
you did say that 50% of domestic abuse cases were against men, but that kind of assumes that 50% of domestic abuse cases are against women, unless you're.
Just could ask this young gentleman, can you tell me of? I'm not aware of a single feminist in the last 70 years who has supported an end to male genital mutilation. Can you tell me any areas where feminists have supported men in ending assaults on their rights? Talking about prominent feminists.
I am a prominent feminist.
No, you're not.
Okay, come on. Jokes aside.
Well, can you tell me of one prominent feminist today who has come out against MGM? I don't know of one. Do list them.
I have made a point of asking prominent feminists on Twitter about their thoughts on it, and I've been ignored, for the record.
Okay, guys, I'm just conscious. We can come back to this, but I know Michelle wants to make a point, so I'd like to just move on to that first, just so she's not kept waiting. So yeah, shoot. Right, there we go.
So I just wanted to comment quickly because basically a job that I had in the past recently involved safeguarding training, and part of that safeguarding training included the Duluth model that quite a few of us are familiar with, and a section of the Duluth model, basically it's supposed to help medical professionals, people dealing with the public, say like police, nurses, so on, how to recognize and report abuse, domestic abuse, or say between partners towards children. But basically the Duluth model has, it's like a little circular kind of pie chart, that's the best way I can think of describing it, but it literally has one section that says using male privilege, and it like that is just kind of screams to the fact that what about would they put a section in that said using female privilege, and under that using male privilege section, there were things like enforcing strict gender roles, but there just isn't that much emphasis put on male victims or specifically female perpetrators, because it's right there in the little, like, they give it to you as part of the whole training process, and it says using male privilege, and to me that kind of, you're poisoning the well at that point. So you're kind of going to be seeking out the behavior in men, but not so much being aware of that behavior in women, regardless of like what sex their partner is. And I don't see a lot of support from the feminist movement in general for male victims of sexual assault, male victims of domestic violence, genital mutilation. The place that I worked in, basically it was a private hospital, and they took part in male genital mutilation, otherwise more commonly known as circumcision, on very young infants. And there would never be that kind of equivalent in the UK. Just bring in your young girls, have them circumcised, as if it's just another thing to check off the calendar, make that appointment. And there was something else, but it slipped my mind at the moment. Maybe it'll come back. But those are just my few comments on, and that's my experience as an ex-feminist. I do call myself an ex-feminist. They're just that was one thing. A lot of the time, men are blamed for their own issues. Men don't talk about their emotions as much. Men don't seek out help as much. But if it were any other group, if it were women, if it were gay people, if it were trans people, the emphasis would be put on the services to reach out to those groups, specifically because they are those groups. And so there isn't the same kind of thing, oh, we need to reach out to men. No, it's a lot of the emphasis is put on men. You don't talk about your feelings enough. That's just not in a lot of most men's nature, to talk about their feelings. It's not how they naturally process emotions or maybe past experiences. I think a lot more needs to be done to tailor services to men's nature. But I can see a few people have responses, and I'll finish there for now.
Okay, so I think Charlotte had one, so you can go ahead, Charlotte, as a response to that.
Right. So mine was specifically, sorry, I'll turn my phone if I'm getting like text. Mine was specifically to do with the fact that, so you mentioned before that with services like mental health and men's mental health, they don't really reach out to men. And men aren't really able to talk about their feelings as much. But I think that directly contradicts something that Elizabeth said in her talk about how masculinity was a positive thing and encouraging that in men was a positive thing. But I think that idea of that lack of emotion, or that lack of, what's seen as a feminine emotion, I guess, of like sadness or vulnerability, as in my own interpretation of it is that way. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but as in that's how I interpret it. I think that in society a lot, certain emotions are accredited to being more feminine than others, and vulnerability is one of them, and being upset is one of them, when it's not. Because there was something that was written, and I was in Spain about it, and they were saying that their dad told them there was only 2 appropriate times to cry. One was when your football team lost, and one was when someone died, and that was it. There was no other times. And I think that there's a certain inconsistency between encouraging masculinity in a traditional sense and then also being like, oh, but like men can't talk about their emotions or can't identify with this. So yeah, that was, I had a concluding part to it, but it's gone. It's up to Tom really.
There's a really interesting chapter. There's a very important book which I think most of you are in university, so you'll actually be able to access through your university library. Although if you wanted to buy it, it's 140 quid. But it's called the Palgrave Handbook of Male Mental Health and Male Psychology, I think. Something very similar. It's by Palgrave. You can find it if you go to the Male Psychology Network website. And there's a chapter in there. So that was what I was talking about. It's in that book, the research on how having positive ideas about masculinity is good for men's mental health and a barrier against suicidality. But another chapter in there is about the nuance between viewing masculine kind of characteristics as stereotypes and as archetypes. So we view, you know, men's inability to cry, you know, for example, as a stereotype. And, you know, obviously it is limited. Men can indeed cry, and some men will cry more easily than some women. However, so is it Barry and Seeger? It's definitely Martin Seeger, but it might be some other people apart from Barry and John Barry as well, who argue that masculine characteristics are deeper than just being stereotypes. You know, they call the social conditioning theory a political fashion, not a scientific theory. And they claim, you know, that because we see the same kind of attributes associated with masculinity across cultures, across time, the likelihood is that there is some biological basis for them. And so what we need to do is appeal to men, you know, in accordance with the things that are important to them. So, you know, rather than saying, you know, you are just a weak and vulnerable human, just like a woman, behave more like a woman and you'll be better.
Yeah.
What we should do is say, look, you want to protect your family, then you need to make sure you're protecting yourself, because if you know, stumble, then they won't have you to protect them. They want to provide for their family. We have to tell them, you know, providing for your family necessitates you looking after yourself, so you're in a capable position to do that. You know, men want to be strong, and so we say to them, you know, it is a mark of strength to be able to admit when you need a little bit of help. And so, you know, just tailoring our messages to men and what is in men, rather than assuming, you know, like Michelle was saying, that men are just dysfunctional women and they just need to be socialized more to be more womanly, you know, which was something that was said, you know, not in those exact terms, but in the last International Men's Day debate in the House of Commons, a female MP got up and said that, you know, men need to be more like women because we talk to our friends and that's how we get through things, and that's why they have such a high suicide rate. And I think that there is, you know, a much more humane and compassionate way and an effective way of reaching out to men, like Michelle was saying, you know, to come into these services. These services need to, you know, be tailored for the men, not the other way around.
Yeah, can I agree with a lot of what?
Hang on,
Oh.
I'll just quickly, I think we'll go to Eloise first, then Edward afterwards, then Charlotte again after that. So yeah, let's keep that order. Trying to give both sides equal time here, basically.
No, not at all. You know, the dictionary definition of feminism, I think, should be changed. And I think it should be changed to the belief that women are disadvantaged as compared to men, that this is a societal problem and that it needs to be fixed. You know, I don't see any evidence for feminism being about equal rights whatsoever. And I'm just trying to think about the distinction between feminism as an ideology and active feminism. I mean, I see distinctions between
Would you want
different feminists. Go on.
to?
I see a difference. I said I would make a distinction between the image that feminism has successfully kind of propagated about itself and what it's about. You know, like Michelle, I am an ex-feminist, and I came to the movement because I thought it was about equal rights, and I thought it was about sisterhood, and I found out that it was really not at all either of those things. And yet, you know, the PR machine has been really effective in spreading the idea that it is.
Okay.
So here's the order we'll go, and we'll do Edward next, then Charlotte can go, then we'll go back to Mike.
So I've just had a few things to say from what Elizabeth said a moment ago. Look, I have experience of mental health issues, right? I had depression for about 10 years, okay? And I actually do think there is something very useful telling men that they should certainly go and talk to somebody about it. That is certainly very useful, and I would agree with that. But what I don't like is this feminist idea that all men have to do is just to wave a magic wand to solve all of their mental health issues, is just to cry a little bit more. I mean, that's just really silly. I mean, you know, men and women do express emotion differently. And the thing is that, you know, you have to meet men with mental health services and dealing with mental health, and that you have to meet men where they are and not try to change them into something that they're not. And so, you know, so I'm somebody who will cry, but I won't do it in public, you know. So if I'm in the room, for example, with a trusted professional of some kind, hopefully is male friendly, then it's something that I might do, but I won't do it in public. And, you know, people and feminists just have to get over it, quite frankly, that I'm just not going to do it. And, you know, women are more known for crying in public, and I don't criticize them for that. I mean, that's perfectly fine. That's natural. And if that's the way it is, but you have to meet men where they are. So we should be asking as a society, you know, we shouldn't be saying, well, why are men so useless at getting help? We should be saying, why are we so useless at helping men?
It may not represent the average coffee shop feminist, but it certainly represents the average feminist in power, I think, is the problem.
Yeah, I think when the narrative is just cry more, what men are hearing is you have to be more like women. That is what men hear. Whether that was how it's intended, I'm not sure. But that's what I'm hearing anyway as a man, and I don't think that's entirely helpful. I think the other thing as well about men approaching mental health services is whether they feel that anybody cares in the first place, to be honest with you. I mean, one of the things that Elizabeth, I think, held up the book, which is the empathy gap, which is this idea that as a society, we have more empathy for women and women's issues because, you know, everybody likes women. We want to protect women. And I think men, either consciously or unconsciously, feel that they are always second to that consideration. And so I think men feel that, well, why bother getting help in the first place, because nobody cares about me anyway. I'm a man. So, and I'm being called privileged all the time by the feminist movement. So, you know, who gives a toss about me? What, you know? And so, you know, does anybody honestly think that these feminist narratives, such as you're a male and you're privileged and you've got all the patriarchal control and all the rest of it, does anybody honestly think that that is positive for male mental health? Because I don't.
Okay, Charlotte, if you'd like to respond to that.
Sorry, I started talking and I realized I was still muted. I have a few points to make, and I wrote them down because otherwise I would have forgotten them. First of all, I'll reply to Edward in that sense of, I think that there's a certain level of, it's not that men have to, you know, they don't experience issues and they don't experience trauma and they don't experience mental health. I think it's more to do with the fact that their gender is less likely to influence that experience in a negative way, in a different way that, you know, women will have that. And then I wanted to go back to Elizabeth's initial point that I wanted to respond to, where I think I know from my own experience with kind of growing up with boys going through puberty and going through a time that's very mentally taxing on everyone, especially men, because they're kind of taught from that going from boys to men element and what that entails to do with emotions and how one expresses them. I think that a lot of the times what happens is when those men express emotions that, like I said before, society considers feminine, they then accredit them to being feminine. And a lot of the time it's the idea of being gay and how it links to homosexuality. And you'll see it online in certain tweets and things where people will say, like, you know, oh, fellas, is it gay to be sad? Do you know what I mean? And it's one of those things. And I think also there was another thing. I think that it's not to do with like men not able to like being pushed to cry or saying like, oh, if you'll feel better if you just cry more, your mental health will be better if you cry more, you won't have depression or bipolar or PTSD or whatever trauma you're experiencing if you just cry more, because that's obviously not a viable course. I think it's more to do with the idea of if you're able to get help and feel comfortable going to a medical professional or reaching out to your friends and family or reaching out to someone who can help and being vulnerable with them in that setting, then that'll be very beneficial for you. And whether that includes crying or not, it's the idea of being vulnerable and acknowledging that you're struggling with something and then getting help for that. And then what was it? And my last thing was actually, so you mentioned before, like, it's not the idea of like coffee shop feminists. You know, it's those who are in power and what they're saying. But what I would pose is, if we're doing it like that, if you look at the men in power and historically the men that have been in power, they have not really favored women. And that's the reason why, you know, if you look through history, those men being in power has meant that women have been oppressed in whatever way they have been. And I don't think it's right to, you know, accredit the entirety of feminism to those who have the loudest voices. Because, like I said before, it is white middle-aged women from middle-class backgrounds who lead that movement and have a very privileged idea of what feminism is. And they don't look out for the working class, and they don't look out for, you know, BAME people, and they don't look out for those who are less abled. And I think that to accredit the entirety of feminism to their words continues that narrative of silencing those who are BAME, those who are working class, and those who are, you know, disabled, and their experiences within feminism and their support of that movement. So I think putting it entirely to, you know, those feminists, those like 5 or 6 few who maybe won't stand against MGM or maybe won't do this one thing, or, you know, picking up those things, is ignoring the greater community of feminism, which is intersectional, including men's rights. And it's like you said before, with that triangle of men being at the top and then women being at the bottom, and then opening it up and seeing a lot of men at the bottom there. I think within that same structure, you have, you know, women at the top who are very, very privileged, and because of that privilege are able to be louder and have that attention. And what you're ignoring is the massive group of feminists at the bottom who are doing their grassroots work and looking after their communities and, you know, looking out for BAME people. And I think that it would be wrong to ignore those experiences, because it continues that silence and that oppression that they're facing.
Fair point. Yeah. Can I respond to that, or am I interrupting someone? So yeah, that's a fair point. And I would say that, you know, the problem for me is that, you know, but these feminists in power are making laws and divvying up public money according to, you know, who's going to benefit from it. And they're having such a huge impact. And, you know, as I said earlier, I'm not anti every feminist. I'm perfectly willing to accept that there are perfectly reasonable people who do want equality and do care about men, who, for some reason I can't empathize with, resonate with the word feminism. But, you know, I don't think that that means that I should stop vociferously opposing feminist aggression into, you know, all kinds of sectors, because there are some, you know, men and women doing grassroots work that is good. You know, I'm more than happy to signal boost their work. Actually, there is a feminist I know, and Natalie Quinn. So Natalie Quinn is at a university, I forget now, but she specifically does work on like male victims, and she's lovely, you know, and I would never disregard her because she wears the feminist label. I might say, like, you know, Natalie, but why? I don't get it. But I would never disregard any of her work, or, you know, devalue her soul just because of the label. But with regards to the idea that men in history have oppressed women, I reject that hypothesis entirely. When I look back through history, I see men and women struggling to survive, and having, both of them having strict gender roles that came with certain privileges and certain disadvantages, but were absolutely necessary for the time they were living. And then, you know, certainly it was quickening at the turn of the 20th century. Feminist kind of lobbying was like liberating women from all kinds. And so, you know, you've got, like, in the criminal justice system, flogging as a punishment for female prisoners was outlawed in the UK over 100 years before it was for men. I think it's about 140 years. They carried on flogging men, but they wouldn't flog women, you know. And so, yeah, I just reject the idea that we have been systematically oppressing women maliciously, despite the fact that it was indeed men in power.
Okay, going back to the previous order from before, I think Mike wanted to make a point a while ago. And then after that, we'll go to Liz, because I think Liz wants to make one as well.
Sorry, do you mean me?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I can't see any of your, sorry, this is to the Eloise King camera, or whatever you call it. I can't see any of your lady friends. I don't know what they're doing quite at the moment. But you know, I have to return to my question. I could name you 25 areas. But sorry, Elizabeth, I know you've heard this like a gazillion times, and you'll probably call the Samaritans when I ask this. So I'm so sorry. But I have to ask, you know, the idea that women are oppressed is just hilarious. So I go back to the point. I could name you 25 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted in the UK today by the state's actions and inactions. And I invite you to tell me one area, one, where the human rights of women and girls specifically are assaulted in the UK today. And before you sort of like think about that, I've been asking this question of feminists for 7 years at Speaker's Corner. Not one of them, not one, has ever come up with an intelligent answer, but I invite you to be the first. Sorry, so can I stop you there for a second? So when I say I have 25 areas, can you admit you can't think of one, but then come on to, you know, then kind of divert onto nebulous stuff?
You just
Sorry, you're frozen there.
I do
No,
agree.
sorry, you missed the point there. The point is that there are 25 areas where the state assaults the human rights of men and boys. It's not about women having equal rights. It's about women having privileges in 25 areas that are denied to men. And I'm asking you to tell me one area where men and boys are privileged and women are not. One.
Just in this particular area, Mike, just to give them behind the camera a fair chance, if you'd be okay with it.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, just for the sake of answering your question, because they haven't done research in preparation for this, it might be good for them to get back to you at a later date.
I'm sorry. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're okay with them contacting you later after they've done a bit of research, then yeah, I think that would be best. Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, I'm probably going to leave after this because I've got some things I need to do. But this is just a couple of things, and I accidentally put it in the chat box because I'm a silly person because I was making notes while people were speaking. So one of the things that I feel like we're as a general thing in the discussion, I feel like we're very much homogenizing the idea of men and women, and we're sort of having this very set idea of what a man is and what a woman is. And I think what will be quite interesting is to interrogate that a little bit and see, well, what do in our minds when we say man, what do we like come up with, and what's like, because I remember, Edward, you were talking a little bit about men's mental health, and you were saying like sort of spaces which are friendly to men, and I would sort of ask, well, what, when you say friendly to men, like, what would that like constitute, because what would your idea of a man be? And the other little thing I had, which I would put to Elizabeth, is you sort of said something about like how quite dismissive of coffee shop feminists, which I feel is unfair and not like, I don't know, not indicative of what I like a feminist movement could be, because so much of feminist movements are coffee shop feminists. Like there aren't very many high profile feminists because there can't be that many high profile people, I guess. So, and also I would say that if you're so dismissive of coffee shop feminists, but you say you sympathize with a lot of their ideals and you don't understand why they still resonate with the idea of feminism, then surely part of the reason they still resonate with it is because they can't find like a space where they can like have their ideas in your anti-feminist space, because you are, in all fairness, quite dismissive of them. So I just wondering if you might have a response to that at all.
You know, I hope that I'm not dismissive of people based on the fact that they label themselves feminist, you know, and I would say that it would be a little harsh to accuse me of that. You know, we've just had a really interesting conversation, I feel, between, you know, me and my friends and colleagues here in the men's human rights movement, you know, who identify as various different things, you know, myself being explicitly anti-feminist, and a load, you know, of feminists and pro-feminists and kind of moderate people. And so, you know, I think maybe it feels like I feel like I'm not guilty on that charge, to be honest.
Of being dismissive of coffee shop feminists. Mm-hmm. Okay. I thought maybe I misheard you then. I must have, because you said something earlier about how coffee shop feminists, and you don't, like, you sounded very dismissive of them. But
well, I mean, you know, I dismiss their impact on the state and society, you know, because they're not the feminists who are legislating, they're not the feminists who are providing services, they're not the feminists who are spreading really toxic messages very widely, you know, like toxic masculinity and stuff like that, you know. And I accept that they are maybe, you know, mostly very nice people with very, you know, decent values, but just because they exist, I'm not going to not call myself an anti-feminist, because I reject the impact that the movement is having on our society.
I understand that. I was sort of, sorry, two really quick responses to that. Firstly, I'm not trying to like say that you shouldn't be anti-feminist, but more that perhaps part of the reason less people like are willing to come over into an anti-feminist movement is because you.
Okay, yeah, no, I can completely understand that that's a fair point. And so, you know, within the men's human rights movement, there are kind of two schools of thought. And, you know, I would characterize them as the Paul Elam kind of approach and the Warren Farrell approach. So Paul Elam is the founder of Voice for Men, the largest men's human rights website in the world. And he is very abrasive, and he, you know, gives people a space where they can feel angry about what's happening to their society. Whereas Warren Farrell is he's an absolute sweetheart, and he's very gentle, and he doesn't criticize anyone particularly much. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, these two figures have the ability between them to reach more people than either one of them on their own. And so for me personally, I came into the movement because of advocacy by Paul Elam. You know, I saw his abrasiveness and his anger, and I connected with that. And through, you know, that, he opened that door for me. And then I could, you know, appreciate the work of Warren Farrell. Indeed, Warren Farrell inspired Paul Elam to do what he does. And, you know, also there's a wonderful film called The Red Pill by an ex-feminist called Cassie J. And she had heard of this awful misogynistic movement called the men's rights movement. And she decided, because she's a documentary filmmaker, to go and investigate it. And, you know, the reason she was drawn into this world was because Paul Elam was publishing really, you know, clickbaity, shockingly titled articles that she thought were abhorrent. And because, you know, she was so shocked, she came in and started talking to people and finding out that actually, you know, they're quite reasonable people and their ideals, you know, are not so awful. And it also, you know, through that film gave Warren Farrell a platform that he wouldn't have had, because she never would have been drawn in by someone with a more peaceful message. She wouldn't have thought, this will make a great film.
Fair enough. I won't argue with that. I'll talk to you about that. The other just one tiny little thing that I like to problematize, as it were, is that you say that women, like coffee shop feminists, small, like women who are like everyday feminists, like me, my friends, whatever, they have no impact on like legislature and society as a whole. And whilst I can't speak for legislature, I'm not a political science student. I haven't been for a couple of years now. I'm very behind on laws. But I do know for a fact that like small scale coffee shop feminists do have a huge impact on society. Like this is something Charlotte is echoing in the comments. But yeah, she cited a charity that called Consciousness Raising, which is for abortion, that was done in people's homes in quiet. It's a community-based thing. I don't know very much about it. You'd have to ask Charlotte about that. But I do know that a lot of like small, like very small society feminist movements like seek to reach out and like improve the societies that they're in, like
one person at a time. That's
fair. Exactly. And I would also argue that that's going to impact men as well. Like it wouldn't just be like this is just for women, a lot of it. So I would argue that like you're like that small feminism is not like does not have no impact on society. In fact, it probably has quite a lot of impact.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Can I also respond to Liz, because you mentioned me?
Oh yeah, sorry.
About what is a man? Can I do that?
Just quickly, just because I know Michelle wants to speak as well, and she's been waiting for a little while. But
okay,
just quickly on that point.
Yeah. So obviously, it's important not to collectivize and pigeonhole, you know, all men into one group. You know, I don't want to do that. I mean, I actually think you know, the feminist movement is actually what is doing that. But I mean, obviously, any psychologist who wants to approach a man, obviously, or a woman, should obviously look at that person sort of as an individual first. But the thing is, you have to understand is that there's a whole ton of scientific literature out there that shows the biological differences between men and women, and also the psychological differences between men and women that do tend to tilt more men in a certain direction in terms of their personality and the things that are important to them, and tilt women in the other direction. And so you can't really sort of ignore that. I mean, men tend to be more sort of goal oriented, I think, kind of in many ways than women are. So when men, for example, present with a mental health problem, you know, that I think, I mean, from my experience I just wanted a solution. I wanted somebody to come up with a solution to the problem. Do you know what I mean? I think it's important to be. Can I just say one more thing?
Again, sorry, I thought you'd finished. My bad.
No, it's important to, as I say, I just want to recap the point about it being male friendly. The issue is that we're now heading towards a situation where most psychologists that are available to actually for people to go and talk to, most of those are going to be women, because most of those psychology degrees now are being attained by women. And I'm a bit concerned about the field of psychology, particularly if you look at the American Psychological Association, who basically is now run by the feminist establishment, essentially. And they put out this document called Guidelines for Dealing with Men and Boys. And basically it was an entire manual that was instructing the psychologists to, you know, treat masculinity as a pathology, essentially. They completely ignored anything to do with biological differences between men and women, and just looked at the whole thing through the lens of kind of social justice speak. And it's amazing to think that this is an organization that psychologists in America have to be accredited by. I mean, they have to take an exam on this kind of stuff. And it's just completely unacceptable. And you may think, well, okay, well, that's America. What about Britain? Well, the British Psychological Society, I think we're thinking about setting up a special men's section. And
They did. They managed to.
They did, but about 30%, about a third of the entire Psychological Society didn't want it to happen. They didn't want it to happen. They didn't want men to have their own, you know, specialized men's health section, because they bought into this idea of, well, men have all the patriarchal control, so, you know, blah 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 blah. So they didn't want to have this section, and that just goes to show you how this ideology works to try and you know, marginalize men in society.
So sorry, you're saying that.
Liz, I would just say, just keep it kind of brief, just because I know Michelle wants to speak.
Sorry, yeah. I was just, yeah. You're saying that there's this ideology which I agree that the men's, like, not wanting to have a men's sociology section is like abhorrent, and like that whole, sorry, I'm completely losing my words right now. I might just stop. I think I might just stop. That's probably a good idea. I think it's a bit late for Liz. I think Liz needs to go to bed. But
Liz, you did a good job. We're proud of you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah. Actually, no, there was one thing. You're saying that all of like the men's, like the men and women have distinct biological differences. Is that entirely biological? Is there no class, no like other aspect to it that could be considered?
So I think any moderate person would look at there being a combination of both. So it's now my view is, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but my view is that it's biological first and then sociological second. So biological has, for me personally, has the most influence in how a person is, but then the culture, you know, can either tune that one way or the other. Now, I think that's a very moderate position to take, but that's not the feminist position. The feminist position is that everything is socially constructed, that we're born as a blank slate, and that a man only has male traits because he's somehow ordered or told to be that way, and the same with women. And that's just bullshit. Okay, it's complete bullshit. We're biological creatures first and foremost, and then with a bit of culture that goes on top.
Okay. I feel like that depends on which feminist stance you take, but you know what? That's fair enough. You do you. I'm probably going to go now, but I hope you guys have a lovely evening.
Bye, Liz. Love you.
Good night. Nice to talk.
Okay. Michelle, on to you. Sorry, you've had a bit of a wait there, but yeah, we'll do Michelle, and then I think Johnny wants to weigh in again, and I think we'll finish with that because we've almost been going for 3 hours now. So congratulations, everybody. So yeah, shoot, Michelle.
Yeah, so I guess I could be along the lines of the coffee shop feminist that's been mentioned, except I wasn't out in public that often. I would say it had more of an effect on my own personal relationships, say like with people who I thought were my friends, or particularly my partner that I had at the time. I feel very sorry for him now. And just like going back to men's issues and how they're approached. And I think it was Edward mentioned like therapy and the kind of training that therapists go through. And I can't remember where I saw this or read it, but there was a therapist trainer who talked about experiences while training, and said like speaking to the other therapists, if you had a man who was sat in the corner and you saw that he was alone in a restaurant and you saw that he was crying, what kind of things would you naturally assume? What would come to your head? And it was quite negative. Oh, that he might be dangerous, that he could lash out violently, and along those kind of lines. But when, pardon me, when asked in regards to women, it was very empathetic, like, oh, maybe she just broke up with her boyfriend, maybe she's under a lot of stress. It's just a very different way of viewing issues, and a major part of it is the whole idea, in my opinion, is the idea of patriarchy. Because as long as you have the idea of patriarchy, everyone else's issues are more important than men's issues. And they say, like, I understand that a lot of feminists will say, oh, but the term patriarchy isn't blaming men. But if you're saying that the whole of society was set up for men by men, how can you not say that you're not blaming men for all of these issues? And as long as like the idea of patriarchy is around, it's kind of set into people's minds that no matter what, women always suffer more somehow, like their pain is more valid. Or I was just like taking down a few notes, but then also the kind of double standard that we have in society when it comes to men and women. Personally, I know of a woman who was in a domestic violence situation, but then after leaving that situation, I don't believe she ever got the police involved, but after leaving that situation and then finding another partner a few years down the line, she was then the abuser. And she called the police on herself to say, I've just struck my husband with a saucepan. This is a personal experience that I know. And she struck her husband with a saucepan. And yes, the police ambulance showed up, police showed up as well, but she wasn't arrested. She wasn't put on any list. Nothing was done. It was just, yeah, she smacked her husband over the head with a saucepan. We've made sure that he's okay, but nothing was done to the woman, nothing at all. And yeah, just like there is a complete double standard with how we view men's issues. And I do think unless we address the idea of patriarchy, like all of society was built for men. It may have been built by men in large part, but it wasn't necessarily built for them. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think, Johnny, if you want to finish up, and then, okay, brilliant. Well, thanks, guys. This is, like I said, we've almost been going on for 3 hours now. It's pretty damn impressive in some way, shape, or form. So like I said earlier, we do this kind of like discussion format. Then this is for just the students at the University of Sussex because we are affiliated with them. So if you like this kind of debate style, I encourage you to check out our Facebook. Come along on Wednesday. So yeah, for more of the same, just on a wider variety of topics. Like I said, recording is going to be up on our YouTube channel. It's going to be up on the channel that Elizabeth mentioned earlier. Thanks again for Elizabeth for coming, and for everyone else as well. I know we've got some fairly big names in the chat at the moment and on the call. But yeah, I've had an absolutely brilliant time now. But yeah, have a good one, everybody. I hope you found this productive. And yeah, everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
And thanks to everyone for coming.